Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Look Up, the news and current affairs program from M Compass Media. Every week, myself, Finbar Markey, and my co-host Padraig O'Mahony will look at news stories that either haven't got into the mainstream media, or on the other hand, we feel haven't had a fair and a balanced hearing in the mainstream media. Thanks for tuning in and joining us again this week, Padraig.
Thanks very much, Finbar. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a sad news week, particularly sad news week with the earthquake in Turkey and Syria that has killed, at the time of recording officially, at least 10,000 people, with scores and scores of thousands severely injured, so many more missing, so many made homeless. The footage, particularly the video footage and the images that are coming out, are heart-rending to say the least. We have a few pieces of footage here. We are purposely avoiding footage that is too upsetting. If you want to find that, you can get it yourself in social media. But we are going to look at some building collapses, and we are going to develop this into a story about who is allowed to get assistance and allowed to get international aid and who is not allowed to get international aid. We'll start off with looking at some building collapse footage.
Koş. Koşun. Allahu Ekber. Ya Muhammed, ya Allah. Ya Muhammed, هاي شلون نزلت هاي؟ يا الله. شلون نزلت هاي؟ نزلت البناية، نزلت لحد.
Herkes elinde yapıyor.
Allah Allah. Baksana
And these building collapses didn't just happen at the time of the earthquake, which was just around dawn in northern Syria and southern Turkey, but they have continued since and are continuing now. There are tremors still happening after quakes happening, and those collapses are still happening. There are no buildings that are safe in this region, and people are even worried in the wider region, moving in towards Israel and on more north into Turkey. People are concerned there. They're afraid to sleep inside, and the weather has got very, very cold of late. There have been some, what you might describe as uplifting images and video footage coming out from the disaster scenes as well. Amid the carnage, amid the just the horrific scenes that are there are scenes of joy when life is saved as well. The first piece of footage we're going to show is where a family were pulled out of the rubble, and hundreds of people there at the same time cheered as the family were pulled out in an act of unison that was so organic and so natural. I think it's very moving. And the second piece of footage that we'll show straight after that is the birth of a newborn baby underneath the rubble. Her mother passed away, but the baby is alive, and that in itself gives hope. We'll just have a look at this footage. So very emotional scenes coming out of Turkey and Syria. The border between Syria and the rest of the world is essentially closed and has been closed officially since 2019, except for one border entry via Turkey. And that's where all the aid has to come through. There's a reason for that. And the reason is that the United States has introduced its own unilateral international law whereby nobody is allowed to trade with Syria. And if they do trade with Syria, even if it means coming for humanitarian assistance to Syria, if they do so, they themselves will be punished and sanctioned by the United States. Now, there are countries at the moment that are assisting, like Russia in particular, Iran, Turkey, where it can, Algeria, and a list of other countries that are assisting, but no Western countries that I can come across any evidence that they're providing any assistance to Syria. So it seems to be that there are certain victims that are more worthy than other victims, and that these political games continue to be played on the international scene. And just look at a headline from the New York Times in relation to this story. The only border crossings for aid between Syria and Turkey is closed. Syria is not able to receive direct aid from many countries because of sanctions. So the border crossing has been a lifeline. So this came from the New York Times, and it's highlighting this issue that there is only one crossing and it's actually closed at the moment. I think that might be because of the quake itself. And the reason, as I said, is because of this, the Syria Civilian Protection Act of 2019. It was named after a guy called Caesar who alleges that he was tortured by the Syrian government. We don't know what the real truth of this is, because the United States is constantly creating propaganda, and it would appear that Caesar's stories were or have been used to create this act, which is called the Syria Civilian Protection Act, but it seems to do the exact opposite. It's designed to put so much pressure on the Syrian people by denying them the basics of life that they will rise up against their government. And there have been sanctions in Syria now for quite a long time. And this is just the latest. At the same time, the United States is stealing Syria's wheat and its oil from the regions that it occupies, and that it has come to occupy by supporting Islamic extremist militant armies in that area. And so we have this situation. This bill establishes additional sanctions and financial restrictions on institutions and individuals related to the conflict in Syria. The Department of the Treasury shall determine whether the Central Bank of Syria is a financial institution of primary money laundering concern. If so, Treasury shall impose one or more special measures, such as requiring domestic financial institutions to maintain additional records on transactions involving the bank. Anyway, the whole point is that this act is the legal instrument that is used to stop trade with Syria. And it's the instrument that is continuing to be used right now to stop assistance and aid getting into Syria. And this is who's really being punished. This little girl here, I had the video. I just wasn't willing to show the video. She's under the rubble trapped. This little boy and this little girl here. Video available. I took a snapshot from the video. Trapped under the rubble. So this is who's been affected by these sanctions. Nobody else. We look over at flight maps from Syria last night. So many flights around Turkey with the affected earthquake area. Hardly, not even one flight over Syria bringing aid last night to help those people. What's your opinion on that, Paul?
Yeah, it's very sad what's happening, and you see the human emotion and human suffering laid bare. It is hard for everybody to watch. I think what you're highlighting there as well, just around the hypocrisy of a lot of the Western governments who proclaim themselves to be almost appointed as this sort of authority on humanity. And when you actually see how it's weaponized, and they claim these things about other people, about other regimes. Without a doubt, no matter what the political situation is, any type of embargo on any country in a time of need like that should be absolutely lifted. Aid should be sent in. It's all about humanitarianism at the end of the day when something like this happens. There's a number of things strike you as well. I suppose like there could be a lot of people at the moment looking in at the suffering that's going on. I mean, when you think of if people of different nationalities are coming here, are they seen as the humans that they are? Or are they seen as maybe numbers and consumers coming into the system? But when you look at them in this context, nobody sees that, and your heart goes out to them. So that's just something that kind of resonates with me a little bit on that topic.
Yeah, the Christian Church in the Middle East has called for the sanctions to be lifted. Christian churches call for end of EU sanctions against Syria. So the EU, of course, has sanctions as well in line with the US legislation. The Middle East Council of Churches says EU sanctions against Syria have made earthquake relief much more difficult. So this is the churches themselves saying it. I personally think it is a crime against humanity to stop aid getting into those people. I think from a religious point of view, I'm not religious, but my mother was to a degree, and she would have said it's a sin. And I think that's what the churches are essentially saying, that if you don't lift those sanctions, it's a sin. And to my mind, as I say, it's a crime against humanity. Moving on to our next story, Padraig, and this looks at Joe Duffy. And in particular, a story that is close to your heart. Do you want to lead with this one, Padraig?
Sure, Finbar, I'll take you through this. Yeah, so this story in the news this week. So RT's Live Line with Joe Duffy was the most complained about show last year, the subject of 10 complaints to the Broadcasting Authority, although none of the gripes made by angry listeners have so far been upheld. There were 91 total complaints to the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland in 2022, with RTE radio and television the subject of more than 2/3 of them, or 63 in total. None of them so far have been successful, though, and remain under consideration according to the BAI. Morning Ireland, Prime Time, and News Talk, the Hard Shoulder, were all joint second on the list with 5 complaints each. According to figures released under FOI, there are also 4 complaints about both Clareborn Live and the 6-1 News, none of which have been upheld so far. With RTE accounting for most of the complaints, the only other broadcaster with a relatively high number was News Talk with 9. There are also 6 complaints about Virgin Media, 1 or 3, and 2 lodged against Today FM. The number of complaints being made was markedly down since last year, more than halving the number from 2021 figure of 206. It's believed the widespread return to the office and much higher levels of socialising after the restrictions of the COVID-19 pandemic played at least some part in the drop in figure. So they're kind of nearly suggesting there that people are too busy now to be making complaints compared to what they were in 2021, which will probably take you into where I'm going to discuss something on this, Finbar, because in 2021 there was quite a lot of complaints made because there was quite a lot of issues in the media with people making complaints because of the broadcasting and what some people would deem censorship on the COVID topic. So what you're displaying there at the moment is actually a complaint decision from the BAI that I received myself, because I put it in against a broadcast that was made on LMFM on the Michael Reid show. Now, the complaint, I can say, was rejected, and I'll give you some of the detail on it, right? So basically, just to give you a sense of where they were going with it. So the forum noted that people who are not vaccinated, for whatever reason, are not in a group of society offered specific protection in equality legislation or in the provisions of the code. The forum found no evidence in the broadcast of language that stigmatised, supported or condoned discrimination or incited hatred against any person or any group in society. They rejected the assertion that I was making that the broadcaster was speaking in his own thoughts, that they say he was being objective and that he was just putting forward an opinion based on critical analysis like of current affairs. So I think the best thing to do in that regard then is maybe just go ahead and roll the video and let people hear it themselves and see what they think.
What about those who won't get vaccinated, who are refusing to take the vaccination? I mean, surely we can protect ourselves against those people. 300,000 people who aren't vaccinated and to the way they're behaving, and this is probably one of the concerns that after the 22nd of October there'll be no restrictions on those people mixing with the rest of us.
Of people who for one reason or another have made a personal choice not to be vaccinated.
What's their problem?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they're reading going down all these rabbit holes on social media, listening to propaganda.
Can so many people be that stupid, though?
Well, I think they might sort of take exception to that.
I think they might, but I mean, I think they might, and I think a lot of us have held back from saying it up to now because we don't want to insult people. But I think we're getting to a stage now where we are taking exception to people not just putting us at risk of sickness and death, but destroying our lives. What can we do to protect ourselves from them in every way, not just in a health sense, not just from getting sick or dying from coronavirus or people we know for that matter, but in terms of our mental health, the economy, getting out, reopening, getting back to normality. I mean, these people are dragging the whole country back, aren't they?
To people who are kind of, in the same sort of mindset, because they really are dragging people down. And I think, my personal opinion is that the vaccine passes may not go next week, because at least that keeps the unvaccinated.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see them extended and enforced better, and that there would be some oversight. I know that I've been speaking to some people who went in for a meal in a couple of places and they weren't asked for the vaccine.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't been out that much, but anytime I have been, I certainly have been.
Yeah, well, I've heard that from other people, that they went in to a couple of places. I've heard it a few times, and there was no checks, there was nobody asked them for the vaccines, nothing like that for the passports.
Okay, well, that needs to be a little bit more rigorously enforced then. So I think it's possibly the vaccine passes might well stay, and perhaps if the unvaccinated realise they're not going to get into a restaurant or a concert or anything,
or a shop,
that might. Which is shop.
Yeah, but why don't we extend it though? I mean, the carrot and the stick type of thing. Okay, if you're going to believe in all of this nonsense and you don't want to get vaccinated, that's fine. But give up living while the rest of us get back to it.
I think you might have a problem with human rights people there, Michael.
See, my human rights are being impacted because I'd like to go into a restaurant and not be worried if the person next to me is going to kill me.
Okay, Padraig, that was quite a recording or a compilation of recordings that, to my mind, clearly contain bias, clearly contain stigmatization and things like that. But ultimately, was that not the position of the official position of the state?
It was indeed, Finbar, and just to elaborate on this slightly further, I have one more line to read out to you there. The forum noted that the term stupid was not used to describe all people who are not vaccinated, but just those who chose not to have a COVID-19 vaccine because they believe conspiracy theories about the vaccines which are circulating on social media. So they're qualifying this judgment in terms of it not being discriminatory, because the terms being thrown around like stupid, like when he used the terms I and we, like that they weren't referring to his own personal opinion, which I didn't agree with. But when you look at what was being said, like
I think it was language that wasn't far off inciting hatred. Yeah,
and that's what I put to them.
Kill innocent people. That's what they were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Like and it's discrimination. Let's just put it down to basically what it is. I
think from a legalistic point of view, they're falling into the excuse ultimately that within the groupings that are identified within legislation, none of those groupings were specifically harmed or stigmatized by the broadcasts that you sent to them.
Yeah, and well, that's it. Really, like that the judgment and decision that they came to, it wasn't really a surprise, because I suppose what I found in my own opinion and my own research at the time, I asked myself, what is the onus on them for fair and media coverage? You would think that it would be the case that the BAI, Broadcasting Authority of Ireland, would be upholding the standards, but it seemed to me to be an element of a conflict of interest, in my opinion, because I looked into it further and I found that they were in receipt of a large amount of funding at the time to run COVID-19 awareness campaigns, which is absolutely fine in terms of public health. Run awareness campaigns, but it just seems to me that if you're getting funding from the same authority who is then charged with investigating complaints against you, I think there should be a separation of powers there, surely.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to lead on this one with?
No, just in the context of the complaints coming in, I'm not surprised that they haven't been upheld, and it seems like there are a lot of complaints in terms of the media in general. So it's just something to come in this week. I thought it was worth bringing a bit of context from personal experience onto it.
I suppose emphasising that point as well, that it is the broadcasting authorities that's distributing this funding.
That's right. Yeah.
So they're culpable in it themselves, and I think the funding was to actually run campaigns like the campaign that you put a complaint in about.
That's right, and I suppose where does the funding come from? Comes from government, and where does government's funding come from? Comes from the people. So you would hope for fairness.
Yeah. over the last month or so, a number of governing politicians have been in trouble for not registering their interests properly, whether it was registering their election expenses or registering properties that they've had and own. This really started off maybe a year ago with Robert Troy, who was forced to resign, or less than a year ago. This week we have Senator John McGahon of the Fine Gael party once more. It all seems to be Fine Gael party senior members. And he has decided to supplement his submission last year to the Register of Interests for the Houses of Oireachtas, or the Irish Parliament, if you're not listening from Ireland. And he supplemented to let the state know that he was renting his office from himself, and he also, I believe, has at least one apartment upstairs. But he is a landlord, and he seems to have forgotten that last year when he was making his submissions for 2021. Let's just have a look at this a little bit closer. About John McGahon himself, he's always in trouble in one way or another. He's just out of court recently from charges or allegations that he was involved in a drunken brawl, and the allegation was, I think, that he initiated it. He was found not guilty of that charge, but it was ongoing for quite a while. There are other social media stories that seem to go around about Senator McGahon, and that I haven't seen any legal action taken that I'm aware of to challenge those rumours, so I won't repeat them myself here on Compass Media. But Mr. McGahon put in a supplemental application to the Register of Interests to state that he had on Clonbrasser Street, 57 Clonbrasser Street, Dundalk, County Louth, a constituency office and residential apartment. Other information that you believe may be relevant, completion. So he's renting the office, it would appear, out to himself, and there's an apartment upstairs. I don't know if he lives in it or whether he has it rented out. So another Fine Gael politician, again, just suddenly remembering that they own property and buildings. What do you think about this?
Yeah, recurring theme, isn't it? It's getting so common now that people aren't surprised by it. It's nearly par for the course to be expected, which is a shocking state of affairs to have things in. It's outrageous, and it's where's it going to stop, and who's going to be next?
Yeah, it's they're all rushing in to clean themselves up, you know. But the fact that this started off quite a while ago with Robert Troy, and that they didn't take those actions then, I don't know what that tells us. In more Irish news, it appears that Irish neutrality is coming under further pressure. This is a story that you wanted to run with, Padraig.
Yeah, so Irish neutrality is over, and defence forces are vulnerable, according to Finnish military expert. Lieutenant General Isa Pulkoinen urges investment in Republic's Air Corps, naval service and cyber defence. The era of military neutrality for nations like Ireland is over, and significant investment in the defence forces will be required if the state wants to defend itself from changing threats, Finland's senior defence official has said. Those vulnerabilities are coming into greater focus, but the world order is in flames after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He said Ireland needed to be able to monitor its seas and airspace, and given the economy is so dependent on technology, there should be a capability to defend, identify and respond to cyber threats. He believes Irish spending on defence needs to be doubled or trebled. The Irish deserve that, he said, of proper investment in defence and security. Asked what Ireland's defence vulnerabilities were and how they should be addressed, Lieutenant General Pulkonen said, provide your defence forces with sustainable and reasonable long-term funding. That's one of your vulnerabilities inside your military. Like for me, Finbar, there's continuous commentary on this, and we said it very early on that all this being in the media on a continuous basis is designed to erode people's resolve towards Irish neutrality. I think the best thing is to just bring forward motion to have a referendum on this. The Irish people have expressed their wishes many, many times, and it's been polled many times consistently that they're in favour of retaining neutrality. It's been eroded as we go. We need to really reassert it, in my belief.
Yeah. And to have a campaign that's balanced and fair, because that can be one of the problematics. We did mention before the worry that if money starts to getting thrown into those kind of campaigns, NATO and the United States and the EU backers have a lot of cash lying around. It's not only Ireland that is traditionally, historically and proudly known for being neutral. So is Switzerland. Switzerland's under a lot of pressure as well. analysis. Swiss neutrality in the line as arms for Ukraine debate heats up. So Switzerland has been put under a lot of pressure since the beginning of the military operation in Ukraine, and it continues. The pressure is heating up more and more. Switzerland has a veto that allows it to stop anybody that buys its armaments from selling them on to a third party. And so Switzerland produces quite a lot of high-end gear, and so they're preventing it from being sold on as well. So that's a problem. So that's why Switzerland is under pressure. Also, Joseph Borrell, who is essentially the EU's foreign minister, he runs by a different title, but he's the EU foreign minister essentially. He made a speech, and part of that speech, he spoke about this idea that by suppressing Russian media and Russian voices, it somehow enhances free speech. Have a look at this.
We were able to impose restrictive measures on the Kremlin propaganda machinery and effectively ban them from operating within the European Union. On doing that, we are not attacking the freedom of expression. We are just protecting the freedom of expression.
That was Joseph Borrell talking what I can only describe as some kind of double speak. Is that what you might call it? That you'd see in an Orwellian book or something, that by suppressing voices, you are actually enhancing free speech. Jim, can you make any sense out of that?
None at all, but obviously the tactic is controlling the media, is controlling the narrative, and that's controlling people's minds. And as we well know, such is the need for people to go out and do independent media as we're doing here. So it's a concept not foreign to us, and quite predictable, but it's up to people to go and search for an awful lot better sources of truth. They've got to be their own objective selves in these things, and no surprise there from there.
Yeah. There was a protest at the British Embassy in Dublin last Saturday against the involvement of Britain in orchestrating and fomenting the war in Ukraine over the last 10 to 12 years, but also its continuing armament of Ukraine to no particular end other than more dead and more injured and a greatly destroyed Ukraine. That protest was attended by about 40 people. We interviewed people at it. We cut a wee program out of it. It's available on the M Compass Media platforms. Ireland is not the only country that has been experiencing some form of growing protest movement against the escalation of this war and for peace. In Holland, there have been protests developing as well, and there was one protest recorded this weekend. So that's a protest in Holland against the further escalation and arming of the Ukraine NATO-Russia conflict. I was joined again this week, as we are every week, by John Moran, former editor of the Foreign Desk for the Irish Press. And John gives us an update every week on what's happening in Ukraine. So we'll play that interview now. We'll join you back in a minute or two. Thanks for joining us again this week, John, for our Ukraine Weekly Update. What news do you have for us this week?
Hello, Finbar. Well, first of all, I think it's a good time to have a look at the overall position. You will read in the mainstream media, and in particular in the British media, that the Ukrainians are winning all over the front. This is totally untrue, as is most of what they've been telling us up till now. They are being hammered, and it's getting worse, and it's going to get much worse. Reports are already coming in of an operational encirclement by Russian forces in Bakhmut. If this is so, the 10,000 Ukrainian troops about to be trapped in a cauldron there will have to begin an evacuation or be destroyed. That's the situation they're in there, and that's on the Donetsk front. According to Ukrainian military intelligence, Russia is also about to launch a major offensive. They mentioned 3 areas: Zaporizhia in the south, Donetsk in the center, and Luhansk to the north. probably around Liman there. In Donetsk, it will be Bakhmut, because when Bakhmut goes, there's not much after that by way of defense. So things are taking off as we speak right now.
Focusing in, John, on the battle lines itself, I've seen over and back over the last few months, sometimes areas going quiet. I haven't seen the battlefront with so many forward movement red arrows representing advances on the part of Russia at the same time. Is that counterattack, or is that plan for Russia in an advance? Is it actually happening now, or is this a softening up? Or
well, Colonel Douglas McGregor has a good handle on this, and I'd be inclined to go along with him. His view is that what they're doing is they're testing the Ukrainian strength in different parts of the front. And any time they have a soft defense, they go at it. It's as simple as that. And if they do show success there, they'll push there. It's a very eclectic kind of an approach, but it doesn't necessarily involve huge sweeps across the country or up north of Kiev to block the Polish weapons. It doesn't necessarily include that, although it might. I think the present line of defense is going to fall fairly soon, and then a whole new set of circumstances will present itself for Ukraine.
And we spoke last week that this was, to a large degree, a war of attrition, as much as it's about territory or anything like that. And it seems that the Russians are pounding on. It is sad to think this week it was announced that the conscription laws in Ukraine have been changed so that 16-year-olds and up to 60-year-olds are now open for conscription, and that 16-year-olds are expected to register, not necessarily go straight to the front line, but are expected to register for preparation for conscription. And it's a wide range of people who quite often at this stage do not want to go to this front line. We've seen the videos of people essentially being picked up off the street, out of their homes, from their workplaces, being fooled into responding to telephone calls or orders. As a one pizza guy that was picked up when he responded to an order for a pizza. And it's these people that are being sent against this Russian artillery. It's just horrifying, isn't it?
It is. I mean, if you think of someone who has never been under fire from ordinary handheld weapons, never mind monster weapons that are being used there with ferocious noise, 24 hours a day. I mean, there is no sleep. If you don't get rotated, you have to stay awake or grab a bit here and there if you can. It's a horrendous situation.
I know there was a video going around this week available on Twitter and Telegram, purporting to be a Ukrainian being interviewed, a Ukrainian senior soldier, and he cited the longevity of the lifespan of a new recruit, British registered recruit, to the front line at a miserly 4 hours. Now, we can't confirm that in itself, but it's a shocking statement to hear.
Oh, yes, it is. I mean, they're in trenches, you know, and while they're excellent for defending stuff on the ground, when those big toss weapons are used, they cover a huge area with fire, and they've no chance in the trench.
And they can't fall back. They can't fall back because there's a guard.
They can't fall back because they have these Nazi Kraken soldiers who are standing at the rear, shooting people who try to flee the battlefront.
It's an awful situation. In terms of Bakhmut city itself, we have a map here, John. There's been some developments, especially over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, huge there, particularly to the south. where they're about to block a major road there. It looks like they have that under fire control, if not under physical control, but there's a smaller road that can be used, but can't be used for very, very heavy stuff. I mean, that's still available. I mean, the thing to watch out for now is for Ukrainian troops leaving Bakhmut. I hope to God they do, because if they don't, the outlook is horrendous.
Yeah, we have video footage which is purported to be Ukrainian military equipment being shipped out of Bakhmut. I don't know if it's to protect it and to save it or what, but being shipped out overnight or over the last 24 hours, I should say.
Yeah, well, interestingly, along the front and in other areas, there have been incidents over the past 24 hours where Ukrainian troops have left their positions and left their weapons and material behind them. And that's a new one. If it is the case that the Ukrainians know the actual death rate, which is at over 250,000, if they know that they don't want to be there. That's the last place in the world they want to be. I've seen a lot of surrenders to the Russians as well, which would indicate that as well. And if it is the case that they've used up so many of their reserves that they're not able to rest any of the troops who are fighting all the time, they're in a particularly difficult situation. And that is something to be watched over the next hours.
Yeah. Last week we mentioned the sending in of tanks and to talk about military aircraft to be sent to be used by Ukraine. And we mentioned briefly who would man these things, you know, that it takes time to train people up and things like that. There is an Austrian colonel called Markus Reisner, and he seems to be a bit of a bigwig. A lot of people watch him and listen to him, and he has historically, I think, connections with NATO. And Reisner makes clear that I think he's outlining the model that has been used thus far to be able to man a lot of the machinery that's been sent to Ukraine and the model that will be used into the future. We'll discuss it in a minute, but let's have a quick look at this video first.
Genau. Die Waffenlieferungen an die Ukraine, ja, das ist wunderbar, aber wie schaut das aus mit dem Personal? Wer besetzt alle diese Panzer? Ja? Kann die Ukraine da das Personal stellen oder wird es doch so sein, dass NATO-Soldaten dann das praktisch bedienen müssen? Man spricht davon, dass Polen schon 20.000 Soldaten in der Ukraine stationiert hat.
Sie brauchen keine NATO-Soldaten in die Ukraine schicken. Ich ziehe meine Uniform aus, unterschreibe einen Vertrag und gehe in die Ukraine. Ich bin kein Angehöriger der österreichischen Streitkräfte mehr, sondern Vertragsbediensteter. Das ist die Lösung, die wir sehen.
Was man nicht ausschließt, dass doch welche.
Was man daraus schließen kann, ist, dass eine hohe Anzahl an ausländischen Söldnern sich in der Ukraine befinden, aber nicht von NATO-Soldaten.
It's a bit of a slip, I think, because the Donbass people and the Russians have been saying for quite some time that there are fewer and fewer Ukrainian soldiers that they're coming across, but they're coming across a lot of Polish soldiers. Huge amounts. They're talking in the thousands, in the tens of thousands. So given that we haven't been told the truth from the beginning about all of this, it wouldn't surprise me that these little shady things are going on where NATO troops can turn up in Ukraine and fight for Ukraine.
I found it highly suspicious that all these videos for the last year have been coming out of Ukraine of American accented, Canadian accented, European accent, British accents, and they're all young and they seem to be fanatical about the military. Why would they just retire from the military? It's not a case that they had already retired and then they decided to go. To my mind, there is a plan in place with the British military, Ministry of Defence, and with the Americans, in which they retire the soldiers to some program. They might get some big bonus, who knows, and they're sent over to Ukraine, and they're operating ultimately for NATO and for NATO's objectives. That's what I see in it.
That sounds true, and I'd add something else to that. You know, throughout the armed forces of Europe, they're finding problems with far-right soldiers, that they are growing in their number. Britain has a serious problem with far-right soldiers. I mean, they were shooting at effigies of, what's his name, the Labour leader.
Oh, Corbyn.
Corbyn, they were shooting at effigies of him over in Afghanistan. I mean, but that whole point actually about the people going there isn't made strongly enough. A lot of these people are very, very hardcore white nationalists, neo-Nazis from all over the world. That's who's going there. They have at last found something to do that is useful for them, pursue their Nazi dream or their white nationalist dream. So that particular aspect is kept very quiet, even though the political powers that be in Ireland are very happy to talk about the threat of the far right. No such threat from Ukraine, it seems.
And yet I recall historically a number of what were termed racist terrorist attacks that were carried out in the United States and in Europe over the last 10 to 15 years. When they looked into the background history of the attackers, they had been to Ukraine and they had done training in these camps, these Nazi camps that have existed in Ukraine for at least 10 years now. Actual camps where from children right up to adults are trained to be Nazis and brought up as cultural Nazis. It's worrying. John, Zelensky was in the UK today, made a speech at the Whitehall, I think it was, to all the British politicians and the glitterati, etc. And in that speech, he made a kind of a half joke. We'll just have a look at it first, and then we'll talk and ask you, do you think that was a joke, or was there something far more serious behind it? We'll just bring that up now.
Leaving a British Parliament 2 years ago, I thanked you for delicious English tea. And I will be leaving the Parliament today, thanking all of you in advance for powerful English planes.
Hilarious.
What did he say?
He's thanking them in advance for wonderful English planes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
This is after coming out of meetings with the most senior people in the British government. I think he knows something that we kind of know intuitively is going to happen, but he might know something that we don't know.
Well, see, the issue here at this stage becomes one of, if Britain provides planes, will they provide pilots on our Austrian friends' formula?
I think that's highly likely. I can't see them putting these machines that cost millions and millions and millions into the hands of Ukrainian pilots that have no idea how to fly them. Or that, you know, listen, the reality is that it was announced yesterday by the Germans that these tanks that they're going to give them, this small amount of tanks, is going to be Easter. It's going to be 2 or 3 months at least before they get the tanks, and they're still trying to source them. The Americans, who knows when those tanks are going to go in? Will the game be over? Do the Western powers, are they looking for a get-out clause?
They're getting 78 Leopards from Germany, Leopard 1 tanks from Germany. That's a lot of tanks.
Right. But they don't know where they're going to source them yet. So, you know, the point I'm making is talk is cheap. And they did announce yesterday that it's going to be Easter, if not after Easter, before they can get those tanks over there.
Well, that'll be interesting to see how it progresses, you know, because up until now, the formula has been, you know, basically Ukraine's side of the operation tends to be very PR dominated and not, you know, factually based, like on the ground facts. And unfortunately, the on the ground facts have never been in their favor, but the bullshit has. And everybody has followed with that to this calamity that we're at right now.
And they're continuing to follow it. That's the worrying thing. John, last week you mentioned NATO expansionism as a primary cause for, just in terms of a conversation we were having, as a primary cause to this war. We do have a map that I just wanted to share out up there, just to show what we mean by that. A map of NATO and the Soviet Union / Russia in 1990, and the map now of NATO and Europe and Russia. Let's have a look at this. Here's that map up there, John. You can see the advanced over to the Russian border, and NATO seems to be determined to surround Russia. What's your thoughts on this map?
Well, there's a bit more black to go in yet, because Sweden and Norway will be added to that. So it's pushing even further than you see on that map.
And there's a lot of pressure in Ireland at the moment as well to join NATO. I saw an article today in which Switzerland is under severe pressure to abandon its neutrality and to form some kind of partnership with NATO when it comes to Ukraine as well. So it's all very worrying. John, your outlook for the week, we won't hold you to it next week, but your outlook for the week, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, for next week, I'd like if listeners would like to have a look at Seymour Hersh, the legendary US investigative journalist who has a major scoop out. He has discovered it was the Americans who blew up the Nord Stream 1 and 2 with the help of the Norwegians who set off the bomb. Denmark and Sweden were also involved in this act of war. Behind the scenes, all these things are going on. This is we're being played.
There must have been a lot of planning in that particular job.
Oh, absolutely. There's a couple of years. I had a quick scan over. There's been a couple of years planning in this, and they were determined that Nord Stream was going to go.
Do you think, John, is there a schedule? Is there a schedule? You know, we mentioned gaming things earlier, you know, that they'll sit down, they'll game things out. In other words, they look at all the different possibilities and they make choices based on very practical and utilitarian decision making. Do you think there is a schedule laid out of where we are going that we just don't know about?
Yes, there may very well be a schedule. For example, there is one school of thought that believes that the West only intervenes to give Ukraine enough weapons to keep the war going, not enough to win, to weaken Russia. That's one view. My view, I think, at this stage is that the Americans have got what they wanted. They've got the Nord Stream contract. That was their number one thing, and they have it. They also have hundreds of billions in weapons contracts that they got from Europeans who they succeeded in frightening. This is what Europe is. This is what's happening to Europe now by our friend, the United States.
And buying energy from them now at a much higher cost than we were buying.
4 times the cost. You know, they wanted that contract, they got it, and they're ramping up the prices so they can screw Europeans. As Victoria Nuland says, F the EU.
John, thanks for joining us again this week. You'll be with us next week.
My pleasure, Finbar. Good luck.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. That was John Moran giving us his update on what's happening in Ukraine, and we'll join him again next week. There's a story you want to run with, Padraig, in relation to the collapse of the Stormont power sharing executive in the north of Ireland and its impact on a nuclear dump. If you'd like to run with this, Padraig.
This leads with the heading Stormont suspension thwarts nuclear dump proposals. Radioactive Waste Management, the British government-owned company tasked with finding sites for disposing of radioactive waste, has said it cannot progress any plans for a nuclear dump in Northern Ireland while Stormont is suspended because the project requires the approval of the devolved administration, as well as those living near a potential site. Concern about the company's plans was triggered by an online video showing prospective locations for a nuclear dump. The video shows Amy Shelton, a senior research manager with RWM, outlining the geological conditions that make certain areas suitable for the disposal of radioactive waste. The presentation divides the north into 4 geological areas or subregions. The video sparked a response from political representatives in South Down after the granite-rich area around Uri was earmarked by Miss Shelton as a potential location for a geological disposal facility. Sinn Féin MP Chris Hazard said any proposals to locate a site in parts of County Down and County Armagh was totally unacceptable. Britain cannot use the north as a dumping ground for this hazardous and toxic material. Not only would this have dire consequences for our environment, but it would also pose a serious risk to the population, he said. The SDLP MLA Colin McGrath said, the proposals outlined in the video beggars belief. Our areas of outstanding natural beauty and significant environmental importance cannot become dumping grounds for British nuclear waste. We've been subjected to years of abnormal radioactivity levels given our proximity to Sellafield, and this news that government agencies have been poking around our areas of outstanding natural beauty to find holes for nuclear waste is beyond comprehension. So, like, there's a couple of things that stand out there. Like, obviously, it's outrageous in any way, shape, or form that British nuclear waste would be dumped in Ireland. Like, the whole partitionist mindset about there being another jurisdiction on the island that is governed by the British. It's a reality that we're living in, and it's one that many of us don't agree with. But it's still the same island, you know, and there's obviously border regions to that, North Louth, the people in the area itself. But it's like Ireland has no nuclear facilities at all. We're already exposed, as they say, to Sellafield, and there is huge cancer rates in the northeast. Can we prove that they're coming from there? Probably not, but like it's long suspected. But to actually have this waste to bring absolutely no benefit, like when people produce nuclear energy, they get the benefit of the nuclear energy, but we're getting zero benefit, and we're getting all the hazard and all the harm. It's almost, in my, this may seem to be a bit over dramatic, but it's nearly like an act of war on Ireland, to be honest, in my view.
I think that up in Fermanagh, the beautiful Sparran Mountains up around that area, it's been turned into a gold mine. You have this threat. Now, I recall initially when the word went out about a nuclear dump in the north of Ireland on the part of the UK, I thought at the time it was wishy-washy, the reporting of it, and it was discarded by most media outlets as not realistic. It would appear now that they've been planning on.
Yeah, no, it's sickening, to be honest, and it should be absolutely blocked. Sometimes I do wonder, do these stories be floated for sensationalism, for just to stoke, you know, who knows why they do it, like in the era of Brexit and all that, like, but or distraction purposes, who knows, but this seems to be quite serious.
We'll follow this story on as it develops, and please God, whatever has caused this stall in that project, that stall is elongated for absolutely bloody ever, if we can. We've finished up with all the serious news stories. We're going to finish up, as we often try to do, with something that will make you smile or give you a little bit of inspiration or hope. The first video we're going to show is just amazing. It's of a man who climbs out a window, hovers, I don't know how many stories up in the air to save a child that's hanging out of a window. We'll have a look at this. Wasn't that something that was just inspiring? Such bravery to be able to do something like that. What do you think, Porter?
It's amazing. There's so many things go through your head when you're looking at that, like how the child ended up there in the first place. But the bravery of the man that's gone out there to save that child is amazing. I
just wonder, would I be able to do it? I'd like to think that I'd be able to do it, but who knows when the time comes. And sometimes people say the adrenaline kicks in and you just do it. Our last video tonight is of President Biden has had some problems with Chinese balloons over the last week, and somebody decided to immortalize that in a bit of a comedy sketch. That's all for tonight's show, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Tune in again next week. Please like, share, subscribe where you can. We're battling the algorithms to get good, equal and balanced news at you on a weekly basis. And a like and a share and a subscribe helps a lot. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week, folks. That's all from me.
Thanks very much, and we see you all next week. Take care.